Jake Morrison sat in the cramped shuttle seat, watching the stars blur past the small window. His transfer orders felt heavy in his jacket pocket. 3 weeks ago, he had been a regular security officer on Mars Station. Now he was heading to Kepler Station, a place most guards only whispered about in the break rooms. The shuttle pilot, a blue-skinned Altarian, kept glancing back at Jake with what looked like pity in his large eyes. "You sure about this destination, human?" the pilot asked for the third time. "Kepler Station is not a place most beings choose to go." Jake shrugged. "Orders are orders. Besides, how bad can prison duty be?" The pilot made a sound that might have been laughter, but it sounded more like fear. He turned back to his controls and said nothing else for the rest of the trip. When Kepler Station finally came into view, Jake understood why the pilot had been worried. The massive structure hung in space like a dark metal spider, its arms reaching out toward the pale moon. Below, red warning lights blinked along its hull, and even from a distance, the place looked unwelcoming. The docking process took longer than usual. Jake noticed that his shuttle was the only one approaching the station. Most spaceports buzzed with traffic, but Kepler Station sat alone in the void like something people avoided. Commander Ben Clark met Jake at the airlock. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. His handshake was firm, but Jake noticed the way Clark's gaze kept moving, always watching the corridors around them. "Welcome to Kepler Station, Lieutenant Morrison," Clark said as they walked through gleaming metal hallways. "I hope you read your briefing files carefully." "I did, sir." "Maximum security facility housing dangerous criminals from across the galaxy. Standard prison protocols apply?" Jake tried to sound confident, but something about the place made his skin crawl. The walls seemed to hum with an energy that felt wrong. Clark stopped walking and turned to face Jake. "Standard protocols? Yes. But this isn't a standard prison, Morrison. The beings we keep here aren't just criminals. They're nightmares made real. Creatures that most civilized species can't even look at without losing their minds." They reached an observation deck that looked down into the main prison block. Jake pressed his face to the reinforced glass and felt his breath catch in his throat. Below them, massive cells stretched out in all directions. But the things inside those cells were nothing like the human criminals he was used to dealing with. In one cell, a creature that looked like living shadow paced back and forth, its form shifting and changing with each step. In another, something that might have once been an insect but was now the size of a shuttle clicked its mandibles against the energy barriers that held it. A third cell contained what looked like molten rock shaped into the form of a giant, its body glowing with heat that made the air around it shimmer. "What are they?" Jake whispered. "The worst of the worst," Clark replied. "Pirates, murderers, terrorists, and things that don't have names in any language. That shadow creature ate an entire colony ship. The insect thing killed 1,000 beings on Proxima 7 before they caught it. And the rock creature burns at temperatures that can melt most metals." Jake stared down at the prison blocks, trying to process what he was seeing. "How do you keep them contained?" "Energy fields, force barriers, and a lot of very specialized equipment. But mostly we rely on our guards." Clark gestured to the walkways below, where figures in security uniforms moved between the cells. "Notice anything about them?" Jake looked closer. It took him a moment to realize what Clark meant. "They're all human. Every single one. We've tried using guards from other species. Reptilians, insectoids, energy beings, you name it. They all last about 2 weeks before they request immediate transfer or have complete mental breakdowns." They left the observation deck and continued deeper into the station. Clark led Jake through a maze of corridors that all looked the same. Security cameras tracked their movement, and Jake could hear the hum of the containment systems through the walls. "Here's your quarters," Clark said, stopping at a door marked with Jake's name. "You'll share this section with the other guards. Mess hall is down the corridor, gym is on level 7, and medical is on level 3. Dr. Amy Foster runs the medical bay. Good doctor, and she's human too, which helps." Jake's room was small but clean. A narrow bed, a desk, and a small window that looked out at the stars. It reminded him of his academy dormitory, except for the thick metal walls and the locks on the door. "Why are all the guards human?" Jake asked as Clark prepared to leave. Clark paused in the doorway. "You'll figure it out soon enough." Report to Guard Sergeant Tim Brooks at 0800 tomorrow. He'll show you the ropes. He started to leave, then turned back. "Morrison, a word of advice. Don't try to understand what you're guarding. Don't try to communicate with them. Just do your job and follow procedures. The moment you start thinking of them as anything other than contained threats, that's when they get inside your head." After Clark left, Jake unpacked his few belongings and tried to settle in. The station was quieter than he expected. No chatter over the communication systems, no laughter from the recreation areas. Just the constant hum of the containment systems and the occasional sound of footsteps in the corridors. He made his way to the mess hall for dinner and found a handful of other guards sitting at scattered tables. They all looked up when he entered, sizing him up with the quick glances that security personnel used to evaluate new teammates. A woman with short brown hair and sharp eyes approached his table. "You must be the new guy. I'm Kate Miller, been here about 8 months now." She sat down across from him with her tray of food. "Jake Morrison, just transferred in from Mars Station." Jake tried to read her expression, but Kate's face gave nothing away. "Mars Station, huh? Regular criminals, right? Smugglers, thieves, maybe the occasional murderer?" Kate took a bite of her food and watched Jake nod. "This place is different. The things we guard here aren't just dangerous, they're wrong. Like, fundamentally wrong in ways that make your brain hurt to think about." An older man with a gray beard joined them at the table. "Sam Carter," he introduced himself. "Been on Kepler Station for 2 years now." Kate's right about this place being different. The question is, can you handle different? Jake looked around the mess hall at the other guards. They all had the same look in their eyes, like they had seen things that most people couldn't imagine. But they also seemed calm, professional, like they were dealing with just another job. "I can handle it," Jake said. Though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself, Sam smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see. Tomorrow you start your rounds. You'll meet some of our guests face to face. That's when you'll really know if you're cut out for this place." As Jake made his way back to his quarters that night, he passed by another observation window. Down in the prison blocks, the creatures moved in their cells like restless nightmares. The shadow thing had grown larger, filling its cell with darkness. The insect creature was making sounds that reminded Jake of screaming, though no human throat could make those noises. But the strangest thing was how normal it all felt to him. Terrifying, yes, but manageable. Like a problem that could be solved. With the right procedures and enough determination. Jake didn't know it yet, but that reaction was exactly why he was here. In a galaxy full of species that would flee in terror from what Kepler Station contained, humans just saw another job that needed doing. He fell asleep to the sound of the containment systems and the distant echoes of things that should not exist. Tomorrow, he would learn why that didn't bother him as much as it should have. Jake's first day of actual guard duty started at 0800 sharp. Sergeant Tim Brooks met him at the security checkpoint, a stocky man with scarred hands and the kind of steady gaze that came from years of dangerous work. "Ready for the grand tour?" Tim asked, handing Jake a security pad and a strange-looking weapon that hummed with energy. "This stunner works on most of our guests, but don't count on it stopping everything. Some of them eat energy for breakfast." They walked through a series of heavy doors, each one requiring multiple security codes and biometric scans. The deeper they went into the prison, the thicker the walls became, and the stranger the air felt. Jake noticed his skin tingling, like the atmosphere itself was charged with something unnatural. "First thing you need to understand," Tim said as they entered the main security corridor, "is that this place houses things that would give most species nightmares for the rest of their lives. The Galactic Prison Authority tried staffing this place with mixed species teams. Didn't work out so well. They stopped at the first cell block." Through the reinforced viewing port, Jake could see a creature that defied description. It looked like a mass of writhing tentacles, but each tentacle ended in what appeared to be a human face, all of them screaming silently. "That's a bone crusher." "From Titan 7, Tim explained casually, as if he were discussing the weather. "Killed 300 miners by crushing their bones to powder and drinking the marrow. Takes about 50,000 volts to keep it sleepy." Jake stared at the thing, waiting for the wave of fear or disgust that should have hit him. Instead, he found himself analyzing the creature's movements, noting the pattern of its tentacles, cataloging it as a threat to be managed. "Doesn't bother you much, does it?" Tim observed. "That's good. Last week we had a new reptilian guard take one look at that thing and collapse. Took the medical team 3 hours to revive him, and he transferred out the next day. They moved to the next cell. This one contained something that looked like a giant spider made of crystal, its faceted body reflecting the corridor lights in strange patterns. When it moved, it made a sound like breaking glass that seemed to vibrate through Jake's bones. "Vex Warrior," Tim said. "Can shatter steel with its voice and cut through most metals with those crystal legs. Wiped out an entire space station before. They caught it. The sound it makes drives most beings crazy within minutes." Jake listened to the creature's crystal song and felt his teeth ache from the vibrations, but his mind remained clear. "How do you stop something like that?" "Sonic dampeners in the cell walls, and we keep the temperature below freezing." "Makes it sluggish." Tim tapped his security pad, and Jake could see the environmental controls for the cell. "The trick is understanding that every prisoner here has a weakness. Our job is to know what that weakness is and how to exploit it." They continued the tour, and each cell revealed something more impossible than the last. A creature of pure darkness that seemed to absorb light itself. A being that looked like molten metal, but moved like liquid fire. Something that appeared to be made of the void between stars, its form constantly shifting and changing. "The molten core dwellers are from planets close to their suns," Tim explained as they watched the fire creature move through its cell. "They radiate heat that can kill most beings at 50 meters. The shadows feed on fear and despair. The Void Walkers exist partially outside normal space, which makes them nearly impossible to kill." Jake absorbed this information like a student, taking notes. Each creature was a puzzle to be solved, a problem that required specific solutions. The rational part of his mind cataloged their abilities and weaknesses while the rest of him simply accepted their existence as fact. They reached a section of the prison that felt different from the others. The walls here were thicker and the air seemed to vibrate with contained energy. Through the viewing port of the central cell, Jake could see something that made his vision blur just from looking at it. "That's a nightmare weaver," Tim said quietly. "It feeds on fear by manifesting whatever scares you most. Most beings can't even look at it without losing their minds. Watch this." Tim activated a wall screen that showed security footage from the previous week. A tall insectoid creature in a guard uniform approached the Nightmare Weaver's cell for a routine inspection. The moment the alien guard looked through the viewing port, it began to convulse and scream. The footage showed the creature collapsing, its limbs twitching uncontrollably. "That was Officer Kleiktak from the HFY Security Corps," Tim explained. 20 years of experience, decorated veteran, tough as they come. One look at the Nightmare Weaver, and he was done. Spent 3 days in medical before he could even speak again. Jake looked back at the cell and tried to focus on the creature inside. His vision wavered, and for a moment he thought he saw something that looked like his worst childhood fears made real. But instead of terror, he felt a strange detachment, like he was watching a horror movie that was trying too hard to be scary. "Interesting," Tim muttered, watching Jake's reaction. "Most humans at least break a sweat when they first see it. You're handling this better than most." They moved away from the Nightmare Weaver's cell, and Jake found himself thinking about what he had seen. The creatures were terrifying, but in a way that felt manageable. Like natural disasters or dangerous animals, they were threats that could be understood and dealt with. "Why don't they affect us the same way?" Jake asked as they walked back toward the main corridor. Tim was quiet for a long moment. Dr. Foster has some theories about that. Something about how humans evolved. She says most species in the galaxy developed on what she calls garden worlds, places where the biggest threats were other intelligent beings or natural disasters that came rarely. They stopped at another observation deck, this one looking down into a section of the prison Jake hadn't seen before. The cells here were smaller, but the creatures inside them were no less terrifying. One looked like a living disease, its form constantly shifting between liquid and gas. Another appeared to be made of screaming faces pressed together into a roughly humanoid shape. Humans are different, Tim continued. Earth was what the Galactic classification system calls a Class 12 death world. Most species consider anything above Class 5 to be uninhabitable. Your planet spent millions of years trying to kill everything that lived on it. Jake thought about this as he watched the creatures below. So we're used to things trying to kill us? More than that. You're used to things that are fundamentally hostile to life itself. Ice ages, plagues, predators that hunted in packs, natural disasters that could wipe out entire regions. Your species learned to look at existential threats and figure out how to survive them. They reached the end of the tour at a section Tim called the Deep Blocks. Here, the security was so intense that they couldn't even see the prisoners without special authorization. The walls were covered in warning symbols from dozens of different species, all saying the same thing in different languages. Danger. Do not approach. This is where we keep the really bad ones, Tim said. The prisoners that even other criminals are afraid of. Things that destroyed entire star systems or consumed whole civilizations. We've had Galactic Prison Authority inspectors refuse to enter this section. As they walked back toward the main security station, Jake noticed other guards going about their duties. They all moved with the same calm professionalism he had seen in Tim. They checked containment systems, monitored security feeds, and conducted their patrols with the routine efficiency of people doing a job they understood. How long have you been here? Jake asked Tim as they reached the security station. 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days, Tim replied without hesitation. Before that, I was on Europa Station for 5 years. Regular prison duty, human criminals. Mostly, when I got my transfer orders to Kepler Station, I thought it was a punishment detail. Jake sat down at his assigned workstation and began familiarizing himself with the monitoring systems. Each screen showed different cells, different creatures, different levels of containment. The technology was impressive, but it was the humans operating it that made the system work. What changed your mind? Jake asked. Tim smiled for the first time that day. I realized that someone has to do this job, and we're the only ones who can. These creatures are dangerous, but they're not unstoppable. They're just another kind of problem that needs solving. As Jake settled into his first shift, he began to understand what Tim meant. The creatures in Kepler Station were nightmares, made real, but they were nightmares that could be contained, controlled, and managed. It was just a matter of understanding what they were and how to deal with them. The question that nagged at him, though, was why humans seemed to be the only species capable of that understanding. What was it about being human that made the impossible feel possible? Jake had been on Kepler Station for 3 weeks when the riot started. He was in the middle of his morning patrol when the alarms began screaming through the corridors. Red emergency lights bathed everything in a hellish glow, and the station's computer voice echoed from every speaker. Code Black, all personnel to emergency stations. Code Black, this is not a drill. Tim Brooks appeared at Jake's side, moving with the quick efficiency of someone who had dealt with emergencies before. The Crimson Horde started something in Block 7, he shouted over the alarms. They've got half the deep block in chaos. Jake followed Tim toward the security center, where Commander Clark was coordinating the response. Multiple screens showed different sections of the prison, and what Jake saw made his stomach clench. Creatures that should have been safely contained were loose in the corridors, tearing at walls and security barriers with claws, tentacles, and weapons that seemed to bend reality itself. How did they get out? Jake asked. The Crimson Horde are pack hunters from the Andromeda sector, Clark explained without taking his eyes off the screens. They're smart, and they've been planning this for months. They somehow overloaded the containment grid in their section, and the power surge knocked out barriers throughout Block 7. On the screens, Jake could see the chaos spreading. The Bone Crusher from Titan 7 had broken free and was using its massive tentacles to tear apart a security checkpoint. The Crystal Vex warrior was cutting through steel doors with its sonic screams. Worst of all, the Nightmare Weaver had escaped its cell and was moving through the corridors like a living shadow of pure terror. "Where's the backup security team?" Jake asked, noticing that the corridors seemed strangely empty of guards. "That's the problem," Dr. Amy Foster said, appearing at Clark's shoulder with a medical scanner in her hands. "We called in emergency reinforcements from 3 different species: reptilian shock troops, Hivari tactical specialists, and a squad of Altarian peace officers. They all took one look at the security feeds and refused to enter the affected areas." Jake watched one of the screens as a group of heavily armed reptilian soldiers approached Block 7. The moment they caught sight of the Nightmare Weaver in the distance, they stopped moving. Even through the security camera, Jake could see them backing away, their weapons lowering as fear took control of their minds. "They can't handle it," Clark said grimly. "The psychological impact of seeing these creatures loose and active is too much for non-human minds. Their evolutionary programming tells them to flee from existential threats, not fight them." Kate Miller appeared in the security center, already dressed in full riot gear. Sam Carter was right behind her, checking his equipment with practiced ease. "Human guards reporting for duty," Kate said. "What's the situation?" Clark turned to face the assembled human guards. There were only 12 of them in total, facing a prison break involving some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. "We've got 17 prisoners loose in Block 7, with the breach spreading to adjacent sections. Standard containment. Protocols are failing because the creatures are working together instead of fighting each other." Jake looked at the screens again, studying the patterns of movement. "They're being coordinated. Something is directing them." "The Dreadlord in Cell 7 Alpha," Tim said, pointing to a screen that showed a massive humanoid figure wreathed in what looked like living darkness. "It's a creature that feeds on fear and panic. With this much chaos, it's getting stronger by the minute." Dr. Foster pulled up biometric readings on her scanner. "I'm monitoring vital signs from all the non-human personnel on the station. Heart rates are through the roof, stress hormones are spiking, and several individuals are showing signs of complete psychological breakdown." She turned the scanner toward the human guards and frowned at the readings. "Interesting. You're all showing elevated stress responses, but nothing approaching panic levels. Your heart rates are high, but steady. Adrenaline is up, but controlled." Jake felt the truth of her words. He was scared, certainly. The creatures loose in Block 7 could kill him in dozens of different ways. But the fear felt manageable. Like the nervousness before a difficult exam or a dangerous climb, it was information to be processed, not a paralyzing terror. "We need to get in there and restore containment before this spreads to the other blocks," Clark said. "The question is, can 12 humans handle 17 nightmare creatures?" Kate checked her weapon and smiled grimly. "Only one way to find out." The human guards moved through the station corridors with careful precision. Unlike the alien reinforcements who had fled in terror, they advanced toward the chaos with determined steps. Jake found himself at the front of the group, his training taking over as they approached Block 7. The first creature they encountered was one of the molten core dwellers, its body radiating heat that turned the air around it into shimmering waves. Most beings couldn't get within 50 meters of it without suffering severe burns, but the humans had come prepared with cooling suits and thermal shields. "Remember, it's just a very hot prisoner," Tim called out as they surrounded the creature. "Same containment protocols as any other escape attempt." Jake watched as Sam and Kate worked together to herd the creature back toward its cell using sonic barriers and cooling agents. The molten core dweller fought back, sending waves of superheated air down the corridor. But the humans adapted their tactics and pressed forward. The creature seemed confused by their response. It was used to enemies that fled from its heat or collapsed from the psychological impact of facing living fire. Instead, these guards treated it like a dangerous but solvable problem. They moved deeper into Block 7, encountering more escaped prisoners each time. The pattern was the same. The creatures would try to use their most terrifying abilities, expecting their opponents to break and run. Instead, they found humans who acknowledged the danger and then figured out how to deal with it. The crystal Vex warrior tried to shatter their minds with sonic screams that could drive most beings insane. The humans put on ear protection and used the creature's own sound waves to guide it back into containment. The bone crusher attempted to paralyze them with the sight of its writhing tentacle faces, but the guards simply avoided looking directly at it while using ranged weapons. To force it back into its cell. The real test came when they reached the center of Block 7, where the Dreadlord waited. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, its form constantly shifting between solid matter and pure shadow. The air around it seemed to bend and warp, and Jake could feel something trying to crawl into his mind through his eyes. "Don't look directly at it," Tim warned. "It feeds on fear and uses eye contact to project terror directly into your brain." But Jake found himself studying the creature anyway, not out of bravery but out of curiosity. The Dreadlord was trying to fill his mind with visions of death and hopelessness, showing him images of everything he had ever feared. Instead of overwhelming him, though, the visions felt like a movie he was watching, distant and unreal. "It's not working," Jake said, surprised by his own calmness. "I can see what it's trying to do, but it's not affecting me the way it should." Kate moved up beside him, her weapon trained on the creature. "Same here, it's like watching a bad horror film, scary but obviously fake." The Dreadlord seemed to sense their lack of terror and grew more desperate. It threw wave after wave of psychic attacks at the human guards, trying to break their minds with visions of cosmic horror and inevitable doom. But the humans just kept advancing, treating each attack as another obstacle to overcome. Sam Carter reached the creature's containment cell first and began activating the emergency barriers. "It's just another prisoner having a bad day," he muttered as he worked. "Nothing we can't handle." The Dreadlord let out a sound that was part roar and part scream, a noise that should have driven any sane being to madness. Instead, the human guards winced at the volume and continued with their containment procedures. Within 2 hours, all 17 escaped prisoners had been returned to their cells. The riot was over and Block 7 was secure again. As the emergency alarms finally fell silent, Jake found himself thinking about what had just happened. Dr. Foster met them in the medical bay for post-incident examinations. "I need to understand this," she said, running her scanner over each guard in turn. "Every other species that encountered these creatures experienced severe psychological trauma. Some are still in shock. But you all seem remarkably unaffected." Jake thought about the question as Dr. Foster checked his vital signs. "They were scary," he admitted. "But they were also just problems that needed solving, like dealing with a house fire or a dangerous animal. Scary, but manageable if you keep your head." Dr. Foster nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. Most species in the galaxy evolved on worlds where the biggest threats were predictable. Other intelligent beings, natural disasters that followed patterns, predators that could be understood and avoided. But humans evolved on a world that actively tried to kill them in random, unpredictable ways." She gestured to the security monitors, which now showed the contained prisoners back in their cells. "These creatures represent chaos, randomness, and existential terror." 2 days after the riot, Jake was reviewing security files in the station database when he discovered something that made him stop and read more carefully. Hidden in the classified sections were reports that painted a very different picture of what happened when humans worked at Kepler Station. The files showed incident reports going back 3 years. What Jake found surprised him. Violence between prisoners had dropped by 60% since the station became staffed entirely by human guards. Suicide attempts had decreased by 40%. Even escape attempts had become less frequent. Strange, isn't it? Dr. Foster said, appearing behind Jake's workstation. I've been studying those same files for months. The prisoners aren't just easier to contain when humans are guarding them. They're actually calmer. Jake pulled up a video file dated 6 months earlier. It showed the Nightmare Weaver in its cell during a period when the station still had mixed species guards. The creature paced constantly, its form shifting and growing larger with each movement. It seemed agitated, almost excited. Now watch this, Dr. Foster said, switching to a more recent video of the same creature. The Nightmare Weaver still moved around its cell, but its movements were slower, less aggressive. It almost looked bored. What's causing the change? Jake asked. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I have a theory, but it sounds crazy even to me. Dr. Foster sat down next to Jake and pulled up more files. These creatures, most of them anyway, are predators. They hunt by causing fear, panic, and despair in their victims. It's how they feed, how they gain power, how they establish dominance. Jake thought about this as he watched more security footage. And when their guards don't react with fear? Exactly. Watch this incident from last week. Dr. Foster showed him a video of Tim Brooks conducting a routine cell inspection of the Bone Crusher, the massive creature with its writhing tentacle faces pressed against the energy barrier, trying to intimidate the guard with its horrible appearance. Tim barely looked up from his checklist. He noted the creature's position, checked the containment readings, and marked something on his tablet. To him, the Bone Crusher was just another item on his daily routine. The creature tried for 10 minutes to get a fear response from Tim. Dr. Foster explained. Eventually, it just gave up and went back to the corner of its cell. That's not normal behavior for a Bone Crusher. They usually try to intimidate their captors for hours at a time. Jake began to understand what she was suggesting. They're getting frustrated because we're not giving them what they need. More than frustrated. I think they're actually getting weaker. Dr. Foster pulled up biometric readings from various prisoners. Energy levels are down across the board. The creatures that feed on emotions are showing signs of something like malnutrition. The ones that use fear as a weapon are becoming less aggressive. This explains something Jake had noticed during his daily rounds. The prisoners were certainly still dangerous, but they seemed less actively hostile than the files suggested they should be. It was like they were saving their energy instead of constantly trying to break free. I want to test this theory, Dr. Foster said. There's a prisoner in the deep blocks that I think would be perfect for an experiment. But I need a volunteer guard who's willing to have a direct conversation with one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Jake felt his pulse quicken, but not from fear. The idea was interesting in a way that probably should have worried him. What kind of conversation? The prisoner calls itself Vexthulung. It's an ancient being that destroyed 3 star systems before the Galactic Authority caught it. According to its file, it can drive most beings insane just by speaking to them. But I think a human might be able to have a normal conversation with it. They made their way to the deep blocks, where the security was so intense that each step required multiple authorizations. The walls here were thicker than anywhere else on the station, and the air itself felt heavy with contained power. Vexthulun SL was at the very center of the deep blocks, surrounded by layers of energy barriers and monitoring equipment. Through the reinforced viewing port, Jake could see something that hurt to look at directly. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but its proportions were wrong in ways that made his eyes water. Its skin seemed to shift between different textures and colors, and when it moved, reality itself seemed to bend around it. Guard Morrison, Dr. Foster announced through the communication system. This is Prisoner Vexthulun. Prisoner, Guard Morrison would like to speak with you. The creature turned toward the viewing port, and Jake found himself looking into eyes that seemed to contain the depth of space itself. When Vexthulun spoke, its voice was like the sound of dying stars. Another human comes to gawk at the ancient. 1, the creature said. Do you know what I am, little guard? Do you comprehend the civilizations I have consumed, the worlds I have reduced to ash and silence? Jake studied the creature as it spoke. There was something almost theatrical about its presentation, like an actor playing a role. I know you're a prisoner who destroyed 3 star systems. I know you're contained here because you're too dangerous to be anywhere else. Vexthulan seemed surprised by Jake's matter-of-fact response. I am chaos incarnate. I am the end of hope and the death of dreams. I have looked upon the birth and death of galaxies. Your species has existed for mere moments compared to my eternal presence. That's interesting, Jake replied. But you're still in a cell, and I'm still here to make sure you stay in it. So, from my perspective, you're just another prisoner with an impressive backstory. The creature moved closer to the viewing port, its form seeming to grow larger and more threatening. I could show you visions that would shatter your mind, human. I could fill your dreams with horrors that would make you beg for death. I could tear your sanity apart with a thought. Jake waited for the creature to try to make good on its threats. He could feel something pressing at the edges of his mind, trying to show him images of cosmic horror and universal destruction. But instead of overwhelming terror, he felt only mild curiosity about how the creature was creating the mental images. Are you trying to scare me right now? Jake asked. Because if you are, it's not really working. Vexthulan pulled back from the viewing port, its form seeming to deflate slightly. Impossible. No mortal mind can resist the touch of true cosmic horror. You should be screaming, begging, broken by the mere sight of my true nature. I can see you're definitely scary, Jake admitted. But scary doesn't mean impossible to deal with. You're contained, you're not going anywhere, and my job is to keep it that way. Being afraid of you wouldn't help me do my job better. The creature stared at Jake for a long moment, its eyes seeming to search for something it couldn't find. What manner of beings are you humans? I have broken the minds of species that had conquered entire sectors of space. I have driven advanced civilizations to madness with my presence alone. Yet you stand there as if I were nothing more than a common criminal. Jake thought about the question seriously. I think we're just used to things being dangerous. The world we come from spent millions of years trying to kill us in creative ways. We learned to look at threats and figure out how to survive them, instead of just being scared of them. Your world tried to kill you? Vexthulan seemed genuinely curious now, its threatening posture relaxing slightly. Ice ages, plagues, predators, natural disasters, extinction events. Earth threw everything it had at us, and we just kept adapting. Jake found himself oddly comfortable talking to the ancient creature. I guess when you're used to your own planet trying to murder you, other threats don't seem as impossible to handle. Vexthulan was quiet for several minutes, seeming to process this information. When it spoke again, its voice had lost some of its theatrical menace. I begin to understand. You are not brave, humans. You are simply too accustomed to existential threats to be properly terrified by them. Something like that, Jake agreed. We're good at looking at impossible situations and asking, how do we fix this, instead of how do we run away? Dr. Foster watched this exchange with growing excitement. Her readings showed that Vextulania's energy levels were actually decreasing during the conversation. The creature was expending power trying to frighten Jake, but getting no emotional energy back to sustain itself. This is fascinating, the creature continued. I have never encountered a species that treats cosmic horror as merely another problem to be solved. No wonder my fellow prisoners grow weak in this place. We are predators designed to hunt beings that can be properly terrified. Jake nodded. Makes sense. If you need fear to feed on, and we don't really do fear the way other species do, then you're probably not getting much sustenance from us. Indeed, it is like being surrounded by food that provides no nourishment. Vexthulan actually seemed to smile, though the expression was alien and disturbing. You humans are most unusual. Perhaps that is why you are the only species capable of containing us effectively. As Jake and Dr. Foster left the deep blocks, she was practically bouncing with excitement. Do you realize what just happened? You had a normal conversation with a being that has driven entire civilizations insane. And not only were you unaffected, but the creature actually seemed to calm down while talking to you. Jake had been on Kepler Station for 6 months when the worst possible thing happened. The Harbinger escaped from maximum containment. The alarms that woke Jake from sleep were different from the ones during the riot. These were deeper, more urgent, accompanied by a computer voice that spoke in the flat tone reserved for absolute emergencies. Code Omega, all non-essential personnel evacuate immediately. Code Omega, this is not a drill. All non-human personnel evacuate immediately. Jake threw on his uniform and ran toward the security center, but the corridors were already filled with fleeing aliens. Reptilian administrators, insectoid technicians, and energy being consultants all moved toward the evacuation bays with desperate speed. Their faces showed a level of terror that Jake had never seen before. Commander Clark stood in the security center surrounded by empty workstations. Every non-human on the station had abandoned their posts within minutes of the alarm. On the main screen, Jake could see why the Harbinger's containment cell stood empty, its walls twisted and warped as if reality itself had been damaged. The creature was nowhere to be seen on the security cameras, but Jake could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on his mind. "What is the Harbinger?" Jake asked, though part of him already knew the answer would be something terrible. "Pure malevolence," Clark replied, his voice strained. "A being of absolute evil that consumed 3 entire star systems before the Galactic Authority managed to capture it. It doesn't just kill civilizations, it corrupts them, turns them against themselves until they destroy everything they ever built." Dr. Foster appeared at Jake's shoulder, her medical scanner showing readings that made no sense. "The creature's presence is warping space-time around itself. Reality is becoming unstable in a 50-meter radius around its location. Most beings can't even exist in the same dimension as it without losing their minds." On the screens, Jake could see the effect the Harbinger was having on the station itself. Metal walls bent and twisted, lights flickered between colors that shouldn't exist, and the air itself seemed to ripple with malevolent energy. Worse, Jake could see what the creature was doing to the other prisoners. Throughout the station, creatures that had been contained for years were beginning to break free. Not through physical force, but because the Harbinger's presence was corrupting the very systems that held them. Energy barriers failed as the power systems developed impossible flaws. Containment fields collapsed as the computer programs controlling them became infected with viral malice. "It's not just escaping," Jake realized. "It's freeing everything else too." Tim Brooks and the other human guards arrived at the security center in quick succession. Sam Carter, Kate Miller, and the rest of the skeleton crew that remained after the evacuation. They all looked scared, but they also looked determined. "Status report," Tim demanded. "The Harbinger escaped 20 minutes ago," Clark said. "We've got cascading containment failures throughout the station. At current rate, we'll have complete prison breakdown within 2 hours. What about backup from Galactic Authority?" Kate asked. "They're sending a fleet, but it won't arrive for 6 hours. And even when it gets here, they're planning to destroy the entire station rather than risk the Harbinger escaping into normal space." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's failing life support systems. "They're going to blow us up?" "Standard protocol for a Code Omega event," Clark confirmed. "The Harbinger is considered too dangerous to allow any possibility of escape. If it reaches inhabited space, it could corrupt entire star systems." Dr. Foster looked up from her scanner with an expression of disbelief. "The Galactic Authority evacuation ships are already beyond the minimum safe distance. They're not even going to try to rescue us?" Jake looked around at his fellow guards. 12 humans against a creature of pure cosmic evil with no backup and no way to escape. By all logic, they should have been terrified. Instead, Jake found himself analyzing the problem. "How do we stop it?" he asked. "You can't stop the Harbinger," Clark said. "The best military minds in the galaxy spent decades figuring out how to contain it, and even then they barely succeeded. It took the combined fleets of 6 different species and weapons that don't officially exist. But they did contain it once," Sam pointed out, "which means it can be contained again." Jake studied the security feeds, watching the pattern of the Harbinger's movement through the station. It's heading toward the main reactor. If it corrupts our power systems, it can probably use the energy to break free of the station entirely. That's the theory, Dr. Foster agreed. Once it has access to enough power, it can open a rift in space and escape to anywhere in the galaxy. Kate checked her equipment and started toward the door. Then we stop it before it reaches the reactor. With what? Clark demanded. The weapons that contained it before were planet killers. We've got stunners and riot gear. We've got something better, Tim said, surprising everyone. We've got the one thing the Harbinger wasn't designed to fight against. Jake understood what Tim meant: humans. They made their way through the station corridors toward the main reactor level. The closer they got to the Harbinger, the stranger everything became. The walls began to show images of destruction and despair, the air filled with whispers promising infinite suffering. Reality itself seemed to bend around them, making simple things like walking in a straight line become difficult, but the humans kept moving forward. They acknowledged the horror surrounding them and continued with their mission. It's trying to break our minds, Kate observed as they passed through a corridor where the floor showed images of burning worlds. But it's not working the way it should. Jake could feel the creature's influence pressing against his thoughts, trying to fill him with despair and hopelessness. But instead of overwhelming him, the attack felt familiar. Like the worst day of his life replayed in his mind, but a worse day he had already survived once. Earth prepared us for this, he realized. Every human has lived through personal disasters, faced impossible odds, dealt with situations that felt like the end of the world. This is just another really bad day. They reached the reactor level to find the Harbinger waiting for them. The creature was impossible to look at directly. It seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once, its form constantly shifting between shapes that suggested ultimate destruction. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of civilizations dying. "More humans come to feed my hunger," the Harbinger said. "I will show you the end of all things, the futility of hope, the meaninglessness of existence itself." The creature's attack hit them like a physical force. Jake found his mind filled with visions of every possible way the universe could end. Heat death, vacuum decay, the collapse of reality itself. The Harbinger showed him the ultimate fate of every star, every world, every living being, but instead of despair, Jake felt something like recognition. "Yeah, that's all probably going to happen eventually," he said, "but not today. Today, I've got a job to do." The Harbinger seemed confused by this response. It intensified its attack, showing the humans visions of their own deaths, the meaninglessness of their struggles, the certainty of ultimate defeat. Sam Carter shrugged off the visions and started setting up containment equipment. "Nothing new there? Everyone dies eventually? Doesn't mean you stop trying to make things better while you're alive." Kate Miller began activating emergency containment fields, treating the end of existence as just another technical problem to solve. "The way I see it, if everything's going to end anyway, might as well go down fighting." The Harbinger's attacks became more desperate. It threw every vision of cosmic horror it could create at the human guards. Universal destruction, infinite suffering, the heat death of reality itself. But the humans just kept working, acknowledging each terrible vision and then getting back to their containment procedures. "What manner of beings are you?" the Harbinger demanded. "I am the end of hope itself. I am the final darkness that consumes all light. Why do you not despair?" Tim Brooks looked up from his work setting up the new containment field. "Because despair doesn't get the job done. Yeah, the universe is big and scary and probably doomed. So what? We've still got work to do." Jake realized what was happening. The Harbinger fed on despair, on the psychological collapse of civilized beings when faced with ultimate meaninglessness. But humans had evolved on a world that regularly tried to wipe them out completely. They had learned to look at extinction level events and respond with stubborn determination rather than hopeless surrender. "You're losing power," Jake observed, watching the creature's form become less solid. "You need us to give up, but we don't really do that." The Harbinger made one final attempt to break them, showing them a vision of Earth itself dying, consumed by cosmic fire as the sun went nova. But even this ultimate horror failed to achieve the desired effect. "That's probably going to happen in about 5 billion years," Jake said calmly. "I'll worry about it when it becomes a more immediate problem." Working together, the human guards activated the emergency containment system. Energy barriers snapped into place around the Harbinger, trapping it in a field designed to hold reality itself stable. The creature fought against the containment, but its power was weakened by its inability to feed on human despair.